She stormed into my office like she'd lived there all her life, and she asked me, "Are you the man they call Anonymous Cubed, Private Eye?" I put down the cold can of mushroom soup I'd been eating for breakfast and put my eyes on her. She was sleek and aerodynamic, like one of those breeds of dogs designed just for running. And like a well-bred dog, she stank of money. She told me that she wanted to hire me to find her husband. He'd been missing for 16 days, and she'd started to worry. Maybe he'd found someone else. As I'd first noted, she was obviously well off in both finances and social status. I recognized her as the sole survivor of a cave-in of a cereal mine. It had been one of those deep chasms where poorly paid workers used pickaxes to carve out the raw material that would be formatted and processed into the non-marshmallow pieces of Uncle Scooter's Sugary Spiels of Splendor, the third most popular breakfast cereal currently on the shelves, right after Applejack Knives and Splendiferous O's in Harmony with Honey. She was Brendaline Scooter, and 16 years ago, when she'd been only 14 years old, her powerful cereal magnate family had held their decennial family reunion down in the same cereal mines which had brought them so much fortune. It was meant to be just a joke, a lark, a laugh, but they hadn't counted on a pack of angered workers, disgruntled over management's lack of concern for their job's oddly high mortality rate. These workers, known as the Big Green Jerks, after a mishap in the process of voting for a name, were responsible for setting off a series of explosions which effectively buried the Scooter family alive in the precious cereal mines which had previously and ironically been the source of all their power and happiness. 32 Scooters died that day, with Brendaline being the only one to escape, albeit with bloodstains all over her clothes. Bloodstains caused by blood that did not appear to have come from her own body. And with meat between her teeth. Meat freckled with hairs that looked less like a rat and more like the forearm of somebody's friendly uncle. Now she was here in my office looking at me like I was a stain of diarrhea some raccoon had left on her living room rug. Now she was here, telling me she hadn't seen her husband in 16 days, and she felt like somebody should maybe do something. "Why me?" I asked her at the end of her speech. "You're rich enough to afford anybody you want." "That's right, I am," she said, lighting up a slim green cigarette that smelled slightly of pineapples and regret. "And I want you. I had my lawyer look into you. You're small time, keep your mouth shut, and don't have a very good relationship with the police. Those are 3 traits I can appreciate in a private investigator." Her husband was Ricky Scooter. He'd been a simple nameless drifter before they'd fallen in love, but once they'd gotten hitched, he'd taken Brendaline's paternal grandfather's name, out of respect for the family's gargantuan wealth. "Do you know anywhere he might be now?" I asked her. "I don't," she said, "but you might try Uranus." "I beg your pardon," I said. "Your anus," she clarified. "It's an outer space themed bar downtown. He loved it. Said it was out of this world." "Oh, you mean Uranus," I said. "Not mine," she said. "It's a bar downtown. I'm sure you can find it. That's where you should start looking." It wasn't much of a case, but I wasn't in much of a mood for cases, so in a way it suited me just right. I slipped out of my office and onto the street, literally, my shoe attempting to find footing on a space still occupied by a carelessly placed banana peel, no doubt discarded by some fan of old-school physical comedy. I hoped they appreciated both the crash of my fall as well as the high-pitched yelp I released when my butt hit the sidewalk. It was less than a favorable start to the day. I wanted to take a cab downtown, but I didn't have money for that, so instead I fished a used but still active transit pass from a garbage can, and thereby scammed my way aboard a city bus. Do you ever feel like you're on drugs, even when you're not on drugs? Follow-up question, do you have any drugs, and can I buy them off of you? Leave your answers at the end of the story. Everybody on the bus was a monster, but not in a bad way. Some monsters are friendly, some are beautiful, but they're still monsters. They're as likely to eat you as smile, and they're always hungry. Monsters. Always hungry. I hustled to the back of the bus and kept my head down. 2 stops after I'd gotten on, a young woman came and sat next to me, and 2 stops after that, she pulled out a flathead screwdriver that had been sharpened to a razor's edge and stuck it up to my throat, just under my chin, right along my jugular. "Money," she said. "I'd love to get some," I told her. "You know where?" Her one eye was blue and the other was sort of milky red with a stain of canary yellow running straight through the center like a baneful banana. Maybe the same one I'd slipped on. Her breath smelt of cabbage and cat food, and her wardrobe suggested of societal abandonment issues. "Money," she said again, and I felt the head of the screwdriver threatening the unkempt stubble of my throat. I fished around in my pocket and came up with 2 pieces of lint, a button which read cheese and wine, and half a French fry. "Take it all," I said, throwing it onto the floor behind her, and then while she craned her head around to see what I'd given up, I darted out from under her blade and over to the rear exit of the bus. By the time she'd realized that I'd shafted her, I was already out the door and back onto the street, hardly much closer to my destination than I'd been before the bus, but at least I was still relatively intact. Relatively intact. The bus hadn't been stopped when I disembarked, which meant I'd had to squeeze myself through the shut door and then fallen into a roll to match the bus's momentum as I hit the street. For a few moments I tottered around like a friendly clown acting in the era of silent films, but eventually I figured myself out and got pointed in the proper direction once more. I walked the rest of the way to the bar known as Uranus, and by the time I got there I was feeling sweaty and sore. I went into the bar and ordered a drink. "What kind of drink?" the bartender asked me. "I'm not sure," I admitted. I hadn't thought it out that far. "Why don't you give this a try?" they suggested, and the next thing I knew there was some sort of a multicultural parade of global citrus fruits resting before me in a large crystal skull. 3 hours later and the crowd was popping and I was still nursing my way through my jungle expedition of a drink special. The thing had to weigh around 7 pounds, and I wasn't sure if I was supposed to lift it up to my lips or just bend over to sip it awkwardly from off the bar. So I did a combination of the two, leaning it up to me and me down to it like we were 2 lovers dreaming of a perfect kiss, but not daring to take it. The bartender was a tall, gangly person with a little pot belly. They reminded me of a tall, asexual spider. Over one eye they wore a black patch, and a length of gnarled scar was knotted about their throat. This had nothing to do with anything, but I was on a case, and that meant lots of picking up details and noting them down, in case somebody might be impressed at some point. The bartender had slicked back hair that had clearly been bleached to a faded, dirty gray. Their forearms were swirled with tattoos of arcane symbols and cartoon trademarks. I suspected that they might thrash me when it turned out that I didn't have money for the beverage I'd imbibed, but I was still on the lookout for a way out of that situation. I found what I hadn't known I'd been looking for, just as the crowd started to get a little unseemly for my tastes. The crowd was no use to me anyway. Of the few people I'd questioned, all I'd gotten back were blank stares, and one guy who'd offered to buy me a drink if I'd let his dog hump my leg for a few minutes. He didn't know Ricky. Nobody knew Ricky. Then, down on the floor, I saw what I thought might be a clue. It was a thread, a piece of string, black against the red of the bar's carpeting. I got down off my stool and onto my hands and knees where I inspected the thread. It was long. It ran across the floor of the bar and down a hallway, where I followed it, still on my hands and knees. Eventually the hallway became a tunnel and then the lights went out and I was just crawling, in the dark, on my hands and knees, following a piece of black thread. The tunnel opened on the rear of a dumpster just in behind a gas station out on the highway, maybe an hour outside of the city proper. The thread just ended there, so I dropped it, stood back up, and dusted myself off. I went into the gas station and found the clerk within, eagerly licking out the cream from the cream in the middle cookies, and then putting the remnants of the cookies back in the box, which I could tell he had plans to then sell. It was an old scam, and a good one. Few folks looking for roadside gas station cookies were the types to come back and complain about the quality of such goods. But that did not mean that he deserved to get away with it. The clerk was a heavy-set young man with no hair, not even eyebrows or eyelashes, but he did have a big tattoo of an 8-ball just behind his right ear. When he smiled, I could see that both of his upper incisors were made of gold. Each of his hands had 3 fingers and a thumb like a cartoon character, and his eyes told a tale that would have been entitled something like The How-To Guide to Huffing Gasoline. "I'm looking for a man," I told the clerk, and he smiled at me, wiping down the bald of his scalp and grinning at me with his glinting gold teeth. "He's missing. Maybe you've seen him." I showed the clerk a photo of Ricky and saw a look of panic flash across the dullard's face. He went for what I assumed was a weapon, but was later revealed to just be a sign which said, "I'm sorry, but I do not speak the language which you are using to speak to me." I didn't know that was the case though, so I took a preemptive swing, which went wide and missed him by a good 6 inches. He responded by throwing a half-finished order of nachos in my face, the sticky cheese sauce still 10 or 15 degrees warmer than room temperature. It didn't burn, but it felt weird, and caught off guard, I screamed wildly and fell like a canvas sack full of ball-peen hammers. From down on the floor through a haze of cheese sauce and corn chips, I watched as the clerk jumped over his counter to deal out roadside justice to this hapless invader who just happened to be me. As he pulled himself across the counter towards me, though, one of his feet slipped out from under him, knocking over his counter display of pornographic magazines. These spilled over some gumballs, which rolled into the hot dog cooker. Once exposed to direct heat, the gumballs melted into the cooker's central heating unit, causing the unit to explode almost instantaneously, sending hot dogs flying throughout the gas station at a dizzying speed. I got winged in the shoulder, leaving a painful welt, but the clerk wasn't so lucky. He took a dog straight to the center of his chest, the impact rupturing his heart. He fell beside me on the dirty floor and then begged for me to hold him as he died. I did so, and as he lay gasping in my arms, he blurted out his story. Once he'd passed, I made my departure. By then, the flaming wreckage of the hot dog cooker had spread to the surrounding shelves, so I decided to leave the clerk and allow him his people's version of a Viking funeral. As the gas station went up in flames, I began my long walk back into the city. I was too cool to look behind myself at the burning station, which as it turns out was kind of stupid, as if I had turned around I might have seen the fire trucks arriving and been able to ask them for a lift back to my neighborhood. As it was, I just put one foot in front of the other like a living embodiment of a motivational speech, and eventually I was back where I'd started, but emboldened with a terrible knowledge. Exhausted, I slept under my desk, fully dressed. She came back at noon the next day, expecting answers, which I had, but I didn't think she'd be happy with them. "He wasn't cheating on you," I told her. "He'd stopped at a gas station and died after eating a rancid liverwurst sandwich." "God damn it," she said, angrily knocking over some of the books from off my desk. "Please don't do that," I told her. "You don't understand," she said to me. "He was cheating on me." "Not with any woman," I said. "Not with any woman," she agreed, "but he swore to me that he was done with those gas station sandwiches after the last one, after what the doctor said." Like a trained parrot, I asked her, "What did the doctor say?" "His system couldn't handle it. Not another bite." But Ricky, he could never say no to his own wants, his desires. He was enslaved by them. By his desire to eat cheap gas station sandwiches? "You'd never understand," she said, angrily knocking my coffee cup to the floor. "It's a rich people thing." "Please pick that up," I said, but of course she wouldn't. He died right there in the gas station, but the kid who was working the register didn't want to get in trouble, so he dressed the dead body up as a horse and sold it for parts to the glue factory down the road. So if you're ever feeling sentimental, you might put a bottle of Old Elvin's Ultimate Fastener on a shelf and gaze at it wistfully. He wasn't a good man, or an honest man, or even really a very tall man. But he'd been my man, she said with a numbly resigned tone. I guess I got what I paid for. She kept talking for another 15 minutes. Midway through, I realized that she wasn't even speaking to me anymore. She was in the midst of some terrifyingly one-sided telephone conversation and had simply chosen to forget that I existed. She left not long after that, leaving a pile of cash on my desk, which came out to about what I probably would have wound up charging her. I stuck some of it into my topmost drawer, and then took the rest and went out and bought myself 6 flats of canned mushroom soup. I find it's best to stock up if you don't know when your next job's coming. Anyway, I'm Anonymous Cubed. Private Eye, I guess. This was one of my cases.